I'm so glad that you all made it today to talk about art and social justice. I'm thrilled to have you all here, and I thought what we could start with is, since we don't all necessarily know each other, introducing ourselves. My name is Rocio Aranda, and I'm a curator and an art historian. I've worked in museums for almost 20 years, maybe a little bit more actually, and I've known all of you through your amazing work. You've inspired work that I've done. And so I'm really happy that you're all here. And if you just want to tell a little bit about yourselves, if you were born in the US, if not, when you came to New York, how long you've been here, how has it inspired your work and the kind of work that you do?
Okay, so hi everybody. My name is Aramendi. I am from Argentina. I moved here 15 years ago, and I am the founder of Project Luz and create work to further immigrant rights or labor rights. I consider myself an art worker, and I work in the intersection of immigration, art, and labor.
My name's Alicia Grullon, and I was born here in New York City. I was born in Inwood. And I want to be able to change the way that we relate to each other, and the way that we see each other, and the way that we be with each other, with race, gender, and class. So that's what my work's about.
William Villalongo, and I grew up in Bridgeton, New Jersey, although I was born in Florida, Hollywood, Florida. But my work, I make paintings and works on paper that represent the Black figure and the various ways in which the figure has dealt with visibility or invisibility throughout art, history, and culture. So the more recent work that I'm doing features a Black male figure that is sort of a shapeshifter and is composed of these sort of small pieces of natural debris that kind of migrate, and they kind of disperse or collect to either to find sort of form, to find its form. And for me, I'm thinking about the ways in which Black people have to navigate space or accumulated notions of what it means to be Black. So the work in a way is a sort of metaphor for that sort of navigation. The pieces migrate, they shift, and they reform. And I often include images that have kind of historical significance to them to kind of reinforce that notion of presence, of a sort of migratory presence.
Well, my name is Guido Garaycochea. I was born in Peru. I've been in the United States for the last 14, 15 years. Not in New York. Most of my life has been in Connecticut. I came as an artist in residence to a program in London, and then I decided to stay a little longer and longer. And I co-founded with my husband a nonprofit organization there, Expresiones, which is artists in residence. So we invite artists from Latin America to spend a time there and work for the community, as well as develop a body of work that we reach out to the community. And for the last 5 years, more or less, I've been living also back and forth in New York, and I work at a Queens Museum. I run the program, The New Yorkers, so I'm happy to work with people like me, immigrants, facing this new challenge to be new participants of this new life here in the United States. And I consider myself a painter. However, also my art have evolved, and now I do a lot of other things.
You think about what are the causes of inequality, and there's so many of them, but two of them that I think are really crucial and that art can help to change are entrenched cultural narratives. And these are cultural narratives that have kept specific populations out of that discourse and that dialogue, right? We know how art history has left out many different kinds of artists of different backgrounds. So these entrenched cultural narratives, I think, can be shifted and changed by art. And the other one that's a driver of inequality is persistent prejudice. Or I think for our, let's say, cultural purposes, it sort of means a belief that there are, the groups of people who cannot or don't produce artwork, as opposed to the European discourse that looks at this historically. And so I think each of you, in a way, are working to counter those discourses and create change, like just what you were saying about changing the world. You came to choose doing the kind of work that you do. How was it specifically something that called you to that kind of work, or did it develop as a reaction to being an immigrant and having a different kind of a life? I think each of you got into it for different ways and different reasons, and it'd be great to talk a little bit about that.
In my case, when I moved here, I became an immigrant, and that it took me some times of individual exploration and to maybe 2-3 years to really arrive and feel like I was here. And that was, the way that I was observing the world, how that was responded to me. But also I was in contact with a lot of immigrant organizations, understanding the privilege that I came here by a plane, compared with all the other immigrants that are the communities that I work with now, that is, they cross the border, and all the things that means. So that's when I started, instead of just looking at myself, looking at the bigger problem. And in a way, I was also doing personal work, photography and things, working by myself. And I was teaching photography with Project Luz, working with immigrants. So then it was actually through curators and through conversation that I realized that my real artwork was in this pedagogical space of the classroom. And that's where I was doing all this work. And that's where we were working about to create immigrant narratives by immigrants and also immigrant images by immigrants. So it was a long process of many years, but that's when I realized that that was my artwork. Part of my work as an artist is to do cross-pollination in between different organizations and disciplines. Lo que están viendo aquí es, you are looking at the application, the last version. Quiero explicar de qué se trata la aplicación. Y le dice, ok, arreglamos 100 pesos, ¿no? Para ir hoy a trabajar. Al final del día, ¿el qué les dice? Supongamos, dice, bueno, vení mañana, te pago. Y uno va mañana y él desapareció. Se necesitan 3 cosas: la foto del carro con la placa, ¿no? El lugar de trabajo y el día que usted trabajó, ¿no?
Entonces, ¿qué pasa? Pongamos, si un señor viene y nos roba acá en Queens, ya le tengo la foto de su camioneta, esta vez si le puedo tomar una foto al señor, yo la publico y todos los compañeros de los centros que van a venir, Staten Island, Centro, Brooklyn, Bronx, les va a salir automáticamente a los compañeros que están buscando trabajo.
I started off as an actor in another life, and so and it was during the time of, I'm not going to reveal my age, but it was not in this century. So it was at a time that, you didn't have faces like me going into an audition. And I started being acutely aware that my presence created a narrative that I didn't necessarily create, but I was marked immediately. And that would mark what roles I didn't get, obviously, but the roles that I did get. And I had a moment, my first audition was with Spike Lee, it was for Girl 6. And I walked in, he was not there, but I walked in and the casting director held up the headshot and she said, "Is this you?" And I was like, I can't do this anymore. So that moment of saying, I'm not going to do this anymore, and I'm going to discover something else based on my interest, but also a moment where I realized that there was something in this signification of my body, and that led me to go into more photography, and that's what I did my graduate studies in. And then along the way, I realized through the power of self-portrait that there is something where you're no longer your body. Like, my body has always been my first instrument. And then going back to that place of comfort, but realizing that it stands for many other things. And it's not my intention, it's just because of the visual history, of image history, and how it's been used. And that's how I started doing more performance work.
An audition tape that you did, I think, for William Pobell's project.
Yeah.
Maybe tell us a little bit about that.
Oh, that was for Miss Black Factory, and that was my last semester in graduate school. And Patty Phillips was my mentor at Patricia Phillips. We called her Patty, but Patricia Phillips was my mentor at New Paul. So she encouraged me. She's like, you should apply. Why don't you apply to this? And so that piece, he had everyone audition to explain why they wanted to be Miss Black Factory, and that was the aha moment, because I hadn't really seriously considered actively using my body in that way, although I was making these self-portraits, but it was just a minute of that audition. So we had to have a 2-minute audition. He made it incredibly difficult, and I think he was having fun with it, so we had to do it on VHS. So I had to get a VHS camera and do a 2-minute reason of why I should be Miss Black Factory. And so I was these 4 different characters. One was an English accent person. One was a overly assimilated US accent person. One was a more urban Latina person. And the last one was a person with a Spanish accent, or a very gray, vague European accent, because I found that those kind of fit the way I looked, and I was really addressing that and addressing blackness, Miss Black, because he was very open. Like, Miss Black Factory doesn't have to necessarily be a person who is directly of African descent. He spanned it, and he made it a really interesting conversation on what black is. So yeah, that was the audition, Miss Black Factory. It was code switching.
I want to be Miss Black Factory because it's an opportunity to be a diplomat. It's an opportunity to represent people who don't have a representative, people who don't have a president to go out there and speak for them. I want to be Miss Black Factory because I want to be a diplomat. I want to be a diplomat for people that we don't take the chance to represent every day in our lives because we're too busy, or because maybe higher powers deem them not important. Sort of like Hotel Rwanda, you know? We didn't help all those people because we didn't feel they had any economic value. And I also think it'll be fun. It'll be a lot of fun going around the country in a black factory, because so many people haven't experienced that. I'm not even mentioning multiculturalism. I mean, outside of television. I'm very excited about applying to the Miss Black Factory. I feel I'll make a good candidate because I feel I want to be a diplomat. You know, I want to be a messenger for peace, an envoy, sort of a good envoy for all the necessary things that we have to do. Yeah. I also enjoy helping people. I enjoy trying to leave an imprint in the sand, even if the waters will come and wash it away. It was made, it was done, it made a change for the time it had to.
And being black in art school, and that immediately puts you in and if you want to paint, and if you're interested in the figure, you're immediately drawn into a kind of Western narrative. of history that you're completely inundated with. I guess one of the things that came fast was the realization that just the image of a black person is immediately like, you know, politicized. Like, you have to take that politic and actually make it work for the art and work for me, or do something completely, maybe do something completely different.
Yeah, as I said before, my art has evolved. I think that at some point I put together a lot of things that I have in my mind. Like before, I had my art very contemplative in my studio, like was part of I was trained for. And on the other hand, I had some like volunteer, works that I have always done with kids with HIV, etc. Always have something like that in my life. But at some point, looking for hours of teaching in 2007, I was sent to a correctional, and then everything started to have sense for me. And so I went to this female correctional, and I started to have art classes there. And through the years, because I have done that since then until now, I'm still going once a week. And I have seen the process that have had some of my now friends there, but also my own transformation about asking myself, what can I do to change this? What can I do to be the voice of those that, our society has taken away, all their rights? We have a huge problem in this country about incarceration, and it's very interesting to say something tool that the government has used to disenfranchise, part of the population. A lot of immigrants look up, a black and brown population. My people is there in, huge amount of number, and so I have to do something. So I've been developing my work, which is very related to that, and still I do paintings and mixing collage images, and I do also these interviews with some kind of the visual response that the inmate has to those interviews. But it's a long process. It's a long process because as an active volunteer, I cannot have contact with the inmates while they are there, and after they are released, there is a time, which is years, until I can get in touch with them again. So it takes a lot of time, but I do a lot of magic here and there, and I can have some material, and we work together, and one of my best friends are, people that I've met there. That's what I can say about how they have transformed me.
From my holding cell and brought me to this room where they take your fingerprints, and he just told me that somebody was badly injured and that somebody was dying in the hospital because of me. And I don't know, that Thursday, she ended up her life. She used the bed sheets and tied it around her neck and tied it onto the metal piece from her bunk bed.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think this question of the community is really important in all of your work in different ways, whether it's people that you work with directly, maybe it's students that you're teaching because you're deeply influential in their development also. So it'd be great to hear a little bit about how you work specifically with community, how you define it, and maybe talk a little bit about its role in your work, and even if it's, in terms of teaching or other kinds of projects.
The participation of the community is not symbolic or nominal, but is part hands-on in the projects, informing the project, but also making decisions, creative decisions of the structure of the project. Sometimes I'm just, I don't know, I'm there, but everything is happening I'm just creating the space or making space, and everything is happen. And I trust completely on the knowledge of the community to create the projects, and we never know what we're gonna do until we are together and we decide together. And then, okay, by the process of listening, storytelling, then I can start thinking of other things that I can bring into this space. But the community is very important. We are creating together.
Maybe also say a little bit about teaching photography and language also through Project Luz, which I think is really important.
I started as something just teaching photography, but right away I started asking different museums. I sent a letter to MoMA, to Queens Museum, to El Museo, to different museums 15 years ago to get a free visit to the museum and in Spanish. And those letters that I sent 15 years ago made the project grow, because I still have a partnership with MoMA. The project, through the Queens Museum, they actually hired me to be that person that was going to do the tours and everything in Spanish with the workers. I did with different museums. But part of my project also is to create access, to bring conversations that we don't have about immigration, but real conversation about immigration in a museum, to talk about labor rights in an art gallery, to talk about labor rights in a museum or in a cultural space.
But I'm in the classroom, I teach. That's a different type of community. Still a very large community, and I think about how I can bring myself and my knowledge of how my perspective and looking are into that space, as opposed to kind of replicating the kind of Western narrative, but how to kind of break up the hegemony of that narrative in the classroom. And I curate as well what's happening in art, and not sort of sit back and let that be sort of handed to us by institutions. It brings together about a century worth of Black press, meaning publications, historical publications, with contemporary art, all with a focus on talking about how Black self-identity has sort of evolved and challenged racist image culture over the past century, or mostly the 20th century. How can I, bring William Villalongo from, a Black and brown community in South Jersey, and what that experience is into this sort of thing, art world.
Yeah, onto the larger stage of art history. Yeah.
One of the biggest influences in my work are activists and activism, and the act of organizing, because I feel that that's when we're at our best, and we're trying to really change the trajectory of how we do everything every day, because it's been done for so long from one perspective. So it's been done, for example, we often talk about patriarchy and how to dismantle the patriarchy and how to change a different way of doing it so that it's not perhaps so vertical, because it's always been so vertical, and it's more horizontal. Or ways that we even start talking about ourselves, like even how we talk about ourselves, our biographies, it's lists, checks and lists of accomplishments, but how do we start introducing ourselves and using our bios as a way of how we are as human beings? So that's been very influential in my work, when I see it specifically done in activist circles. There are different ways of bringing that conversation into artwork, and I think, with The Rule is Love, I think that's how I bought those conversations into it as snippets, because those conversations that activists have, and artists who, collectives of artists who do activism as their art, that process and those spaces are very special, they're very sacred, because they are really changing the momentum. So to bring aspects out of that, like in the piece The Rule is Love, where Rocio, you took part in it, where it's a series of work, but the second rule is love I did on 14th Street. So I was guided from Avenue C to Hudson Street blindfolded, and I couldn't speak, and my hands, I wasn't able to move my hands. And I depended on people, to strangers, and then people, supporters and dear friends to come and help me get across. But they could only address me by saying one of the names of 70 women who were killed by police violence. So they had to address me by Sandra Bland, move to the right or move to the left, through the crowd on a Saturday on Union Square. So I mean, that's an aspect that I took from activism, and I think of Martin Luther King, like he brought love into the dialogue of organizing, which we always kind of push it away. We live in such a competitive society where it's like, you can't even talk about that. It's too feminine, it's too soft and weak, but it's one of the hardest things to do.
When I came to this country, I realized that I was an immigrant, so it takes time to digest that idea, but also it took time to me to understand that, however, I was an immigrant, something I never thought to be, but also I was in a place of privilege. And so thinking about that, we create this nonprofit and this artists in residence. They are artists in residence now at their schools. And so they develop these projects in these public schools, not all of them, but some that we have some partnership and that way the kids are going to, number one, are going to have this contact with this well-educated artist that is very proud to be part of Latin America, but at the same time, they are going to, the product of that is going to be shown at the gallery that used to be a restaurant that we are renting, and they are going to show the work they do with the artists, with the work of the artists in the same place.
Thank you all for participating. Give yourselves a round of applause. You did amazing work. Thank you.